Senator Reid has been aptly described as quietly persistent in his outreach to relevant federal officials in promoting this plan. And because of that quiet persistence, Rehab to Rent has now moved to the front stage of public discussion, and with comments due tomorrow to the relevant agencies. So we're extremely proud and pleased today to have with us Senator Jack Reid of Rhode Island.
Thanks, David. Thanks, David, for those very, very kind words. And one of the great pleasures and privileges of my life was getting to know David at Harvard Law School and his wife, Joan, and their family. So thank you for what you do here at CAP. And I want to thank the Center for American Progress, not just for this afternoon's effort, but consistently providing thoughtful and innovative approaches to very difficult problems of public policy. I particularly want to recognize John Podesta. John and I have known each other for years, and I respect immensely what he does here and what he's done for his country. Sarah Wartell is someone who's been a key figure here in the housing policy, and I just want to salute the whole CAP housing policy team, and especially Andrew Jakobovics for all of his work with respect to the REO rentals here at CAP. And let me just first acknowledge the panelists, which will answer all the difficult questions, I promise, because I will refer them to Meg Burns, Tom Eagleston, Jeff Forster, Thomas Skinner, and Alon Cohen. Thank you for your participation and your insights. I don't have to remind anyone here that our housing sector is under incredible stress. 7.5 million homes have entered foreclosure since 2007. Foreclosures have taken a heavy toll on too many Americans, and of course pain to others, because as the price declines of your home through foreclosure of somebody else's home, there are more and more people underwater. As a result, home ownership is becoming a very difficult proposition, and we've dropped to 65.9% in terms of our home ownership rate. That's the lowest since 1998. And I've heard some people talking about, if you count in people who are underwater, actually people who own a home, have an equity value in it, is much less than that. This is a severe crisis. And then we've seen on the other side of the equation, rental vacancies have decreased from 10.6% in the second quarter of 2010 to 9.2%. So it's harder and harder to find rental property, even though you can't buy a home and you're losing your home. And we've got 10.4 million homes that are in jeopardy still of defaulting under foreclosure. This is the worst housing crisis we've faced since the depths of the Great Depression. Elizabeth Duke, the Federal Reserve Board governor, pointed out, we as a nation currently have a housing market that is so severely out of balance that is hampering our economic recovery. There is a debate, frankly, what's the chicken and egg. Is it a labor market that's collapsing and feeding into a housing market collapse, or is the housing market, well, it's both, and we have huge problems. And my sense, and I think the sense of CAP, is if we can't get traction in the housing market, it's not going to help us with these other issues. And it may be through the housing market that we get the traction that will indeed help us with these other issues. This is not just an individual problem of homeowners, because frankly, it's the neighborhoods that feel the impact. When foreclosed homes pop up on your street, the value of your house almost immediately goes down. It's tougher for you to refinance because the value of your home has declined. It's tough for states and localities because their property taxes are challenged. As a result, the state and the localities have to lay people off, have to do things, and it's a downward cycle instead of an upward cycle, and we've got to do more. We need to get traction in the housing market so we can break out of this vicious cycle, and doing so should be one of our top priorities. It should be something that is at the top of the list, along with creating jobs. And it's also clear that if we're going to sustain a recovery, we have to sustain and fortify the housing market. For most middle Americans, that was their wealth. Unfortunately, for many of them, it was the ATM, because over 20 years or so, real incomes were not growing for middle Americans, and they were keeping up with the Joneses by borrowing on what they thought was the inexhaustible value of their house. We know now that there's a limit. In fact, we've surpassed that limit. So we have to be very creative and proactive in trying to design ways to get this traction and get this forward movement. And frankly, given the political realities, it's not going to come through an easy legislative solution. I don't have to belabor that point here. So that's why the REO rentals approach makes sense. It is within the administrative capacity with existing law, I believe, to accomplish. And we really have to work hard. Let me take my example here in Rhode Island, my home state. 3,200 families have lost their homes to foreclosure in the last year. That's a big number for Rhode Island. But monthly rents, and I'm just echoing what I said before, have gone up 54% between 2000. You have people thrown out of their homes who are now finding it very difficult to afford to rent a modest place just to put the family. That is adding to not only this sense of economic crisis, but this dampening of hope. And we have to restore both. Now, I thought it would be useful to try to address both these issues by increasing the supply of rental housing by simultaneously reducing the foreclosure inventory. Surprise, CAP was thinking about the same thing along the same lines. And frankly, working with CAP has strengthened our approach and will give us even additional leverage as we move forward to try to get this proposition adopted by the administration, by the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and finally start to consider these proposals in a serious way. I'm pleased the President included this language in his Jobs Act. I'm also pleased, as David pointed out, that the comments are going to come back and begin tomorrow in terms of the request for information about how this should be done. And what are we going to do? Well, let me give you a short, very generic description. Convert and renovate foreclosed homes into affordable, energy-efficient units. Just as an aside, I was visiting a housing project, and David's, I think, familiar with this, Crossroads, which is our major housing agency in the state to provide housing for homeless individuals. They've taken over old Navy property. They're converting it. But one of the things they insisted upon was making it energy efficient. And so at the opening, the family who had just moved said, not only do they have a safe, affordable place to live, their utility bill has been cut in half. What does that mean? They can now put their son in Pop Warner football because they've got a little bit of extra money. That's the kind of thing that resonates with me, frankly. So we've got to do that. We would like to pool these homes together and also sell them at a fair and appropriate price to investors as private income-producing rental properties so that we do engage the private sector in a way that will maximize their ingenuity, innovation, and the managerial techniques. We believe that this proposal could reduce the foreclosure inventories and increase the supply of rental housing, two of the key goals of housing policy at this moment. And by calling for the retrofitting, the renovation, we could generate jobs, the weatherization jobs, the individuals that come in and put in the new heating systems, put in the new insulation systems. That's going to help us too, because as I said before, this jobs crisis, this housing crisis, inextricably linked. Anything you do to help either one helps both, and let's do it. And I think this proposal will help that. It's just one approach to help the FHA, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac begin to produce greater value for the property that they're holding. And our collective goal should be clear. We want to look for the best ways to manage this REO. We don't have a doctrinaire formula, one-size-fits-all. And that's why this panel is going to be very, very instructive, because there are a whole host of issues of how do you do this, how do you implement it, how do you make it work. And we have the experts here that are going to give you some thoughts and insights about that. We should be looking for the best deal, not only for the formal conservators, but for the country and for the economy. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that there's growing interest by REO rental investors, hedge funds, private equity funds, et cetera, and they've pursued these strategies, and they're looking for returns, and some of them think it's feasible, 8%, 12%. So this is not, again, an unattractive commercial economic proposal. Uh, One investor also suggested that about 20 people might be engaged in working on one of these REO rental investments. You've got to have an analyst to look at the numbers. You've got to have inspectors, appraisers, project managers, contractors, and that adds up. And every job counts, as well as every person that's put in a good, affordable, and any efficient home. By the way, once these properties move in the private sector, the property taxes are now being paid by private entities, not by Fannie, Freddie, FHA, et cetera. In fact, we've looked, and if you look at the inventory of FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, about 249,000 REO properties. Now, if you just look at that and assume we can get a major portion of that back into private hands, paying taxes, hiring people renovations, that's going to be, I think, significant. In fact, there's been some estimates, if we assume just 40% of these 249,000 properties are converted into rentals and they pay about $1,200 in property taxes, that's $120 million flowing to cities and towns from a private enterprise, not from a public conservator or the FHA or others. One way I've suggested is this sort of transference, but one of the things the panel will talk about is other ways to do this in order to produce the best value for FHA, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac. We consider joint ventures where the private entity would essentially get control, but if there was a sale later down the road, there would be equity participation by the federal agency. That's an approach which you have to consider. We believe that looking at these innovative approaches will add value and not subtract value, and will fulfill the legal obligations of the conservators to get best value for the properties that they're controlling. And so, as the panel talks, I think they're going to look at critical questions. How do you structure some of these deals to accomplish these objectives? Do we go ahead and provide equity participations at the end? How do we do that in a practical, fair way? And then, frankly, I don't think we've exhausted the possible approaches, and this, I hope the panel will think, way beyond the box that I've sort of thought of, and think of different ways to do this. There are concerns, though, with any approach, and let's mention a few. There's the question of, well, how do you manage scattered individual private homes? And one approach is, well, frankly, step back, bundle these geographically. And I've thought there's an interesting and perhaps not entirely full correspondence, but the military, David mentions I do a lot with the military, have had the success of the last 2 decades with turning over military housing to private entrepreneurs that run them, manage them, do very well financially, provide a much better quality of life. Just an aside, when I was a lieutenant in the Army and you had a problem and you called a post engineer, be prepared to wait for a few days, okay? Now, if you were a colonel, the wait was probably hours. Now, if you're in private housing, managed by a private enterprise on a military base, it's, you call anytime, 24/7, and their team is there. So there are innovations and there are progress that can be made. I think we can deal with these problems, but we have to think carefully through all the ramifications. There's also the question is this type of ownership going to be in the interest of residential communities? And it's not apartment buildings or areas that are used to, and many times some subsidized housing. And again, I think we can do that, and remarkably so. It turns out that there's an increasingly amount of single-family homes that are rental property. Maybe 20 or 30 years ago, if it was a single-family home, it was owned. Now I've heard numbers as high as half of single-family homes are being rented. In fact, one of the ironies that we're seeing is that there are many people increasingly who own a home they rent and rent a home they live in. And that phenomenon is going to increase, not decrease. So we can deal with this issue, but we have to think about it. And I think what we have to do is make sure that this is a scale that has an impact, not onesies and twosies, but this is to make an impact, it has to be a large scale. And so we have to figure out how to do it and scale it up so it's not just a nice model pilot someplace this is going to start getting traction and effect quickly and in a broad nationwide approach. And again, the panelists are going to talk about that, and I'm glad they are. We have to remember that we are working within the contours of FHFA's conservatorship of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And as a conservator, FHFA has a duty to carry on the business of Fannie and Freddie and to preserve and conserve the assets of both. And repeatedly they have said that. They should. That is their legal obligation. And I understand they have to minimize their losses, but I would argue that this approach can create value if done carefully and diligently, not just minimizing losses. And creating value should be part of their mission, if it's not explicit, then implicit. With an effective REO rental strategy, Fannie and Freddie could create value. For example, selling, in contrast to selling individual homes at fire sale prices, bundling them, putting it in the private hands, maybe with equity participation at the end on sales, transferring some of their responsibilities for maintenance and property taxes could in fact enhance the value. The other way to look at it is if 5 years from now nothing's done, those houses are going to be, it's a ghost town. With the pipes will be gone, the roofs will be broken, the grass won't be cut, and then try to sell them. They're not going to realize much value, I don't think. So I am encouraging, and I'm very pleased that FHA has put out their request for information. I understand their legal responsibilities. I respect them, but I think we can do this. And we have to, I think, also look in terms of financial efficiency. Many times when we talk about these approaches, we get this reflexive argument from opponents that, oh, moral hazard. Yes, there is the issue of moral hazard, but I think if we look at economic efficiency, this argument just is very strong and very powerful. And I would just say we don't get many times the same moral hazard argument when a banking syndicate is asked by a corporate borrower to revise their lending agreements so they can make smaller payments, stay in the game, and ultimately pay off the loan. That's seen as smart business. Well, we can do smart business with rental housing too, and we should. Now, we have to, as I said, get traction in our housing markets. The CAP work has been absolutely first rate. I look forward to working with you. I want to thank you for what you're doing, for not only this conference, but for keeping the attention and the focus on this program. Without CAP's endorsement, I don't think it would have found its way into the President's speech. I can assure you I want to work with you going forward. Let me again thank you. I'd be happy to answer questions with the caveat the hard ones go to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much and for your leadership on this. And we do have time for just a few questions. We usually see if the press have any just as a courtesy to start off. I don't see any hands up. So from the audience, we got time for one or two?
One hand back there. This is another stunning performance.
Oh,
everyone is just so stunned.
My colleague is coming around with the microphone.
Thank you. With the Alexandria News, and I live in Alexandria. I'm listening to your conversation. Alexandria is particularly non-rental friendly. I am a renter. I've been a renter all my life.
Right.
I listened to your proposal, and I think that according to the papers, renting is in now. And renters who are median income renters are paying the property taxes for the apartment buildings that the buildings are on.
Right.
Is there going to be a change in attitude in this country now that home ownership is nice if you can afford it, but when you look at the median income in Alexandria, which is $106,000, and then you have to go on median incomes for other families or individuals, isn't it time we start being a little more realistic about who can afford that condo, who can afford that home, who can afford the rent at a market rate, which I am, and then you have HUD, Section 8, or whatever in each city or town. And I think it's really an issue that everybody's bypassing. And I think it's time that the government or at least in Alexandria, I have pushed because I have been chair of the landlord-tenant board, that it's okay to be a renter. We pay taxes. We live there. And homeownership is nice if you can afford it. But I think the foreclosures, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, have really messed things up. And I'd like to hear what your, public-private partnerships, that's fine. But renting is in. It's okay. So what
Great.
can we do to promote
No,
that?
no.
Because low, middle-income families cannot afford to own
Thank
a
you.
home.
Well,
Pay
I think, frankly, what's happened is that, let me go back a while, where there was this incredible push for home ownership. It was basically part of a larger sort of scheme about building the wealth economy. And a couple of things happened, I think, unintentionally, because this was not some devious plan. Unintentionally, when we started focusing on wealth, we lost track of something important: jobs. I think, of what do we do? How do we create policies that actually build jobs? Because we were fascinated with the notion of wealth, and we saw wealth as being generated so often by financial institutions, by financial products, rather than building things that we could ship around the world, et cetera. That's another side. But if you look through the 2000 on, and before that, owning a home was the American dream, and it was not a partisan issue, et cetera. But I think what we failed in that enthusiasm to recognize what we do now is for many reasons. Some by choice, some by economic circumstances, some by other factors. Renting is the better option. We did not devote, frankly, 2000 on, the same kind of attention to adequate, affordable, decent rental properties that we did in terms of the headlines of, housing, home ownership up now 60, 66, now it's 68, now it's, and I think, frankly, one of the realities of the 2008, 2009, 2007 financial crisis, people, first recognized that for many people, rental housing is a better option. And better option, and also for some at this point, it's the only effective, feasible option. And now we're beginning to think, as we did 10 years ago, how do we create affordable rental housing that's decent, et cetera, and so we're beginning to focus that attention. So I think that shift is taking place. There's a lot more that we can do beyond this REO rental property. There's whole issues that I won't get into in terms of taxes and everything else, but the panel, because that's a hard one, they'll talk about that. Yes?
First of all, let me say,
Just a moment. Oh, wait for the microphone, and thank you. Introduce yourself.
okay. I'm John Settles, and I've actually worked on all sides of the issue as a lender, as a developer, and I think it's a fabulous program. My question is, in all the markets I've worked in, I haven't seen connectivity of existing federal programs that would enhance this. So for instance, the housing authorities in all markets have the Section 8 home ownership program, which is underutilized and is not being focused on the REO issue. The Hope 6 programs. There's all these different programs. So is there any move afoot now to try to connect some existing programs that are out there that have dollars so that they can work in a synergistic way to address this problem?
I think you pointed out a chronic problem with not just housing policy, but many other policies where there's lots of different moving parts, but they're not, and sometimes coordinated in a very effective way. That's something, frankly, we're going to have to work on. I don't want to dodge the issue, but I think this program, if we get her off the ground, and we can coordinate the efforts of FHFA, FHA, and we can start thinking of other possibilities to add on, might be a catalyst for some more thoughtful thinking. My impression, just looking at the experience in Rhode Island of the Hardest Hit Fund, was that was very effectively deployed. So there are examples where programs are very cost-effective and efficient. They are synergistic. And I guess my instincts, not particularly well-informed, but instincts are, at the local level, if you can provide kind of the clearinghouse, that's going to be your better chance for complementarity, for collaboration, et cetera. When we try to do it here in Washington, in fact, it's just too far from K Street to Broad Street in Providence, Rhode Island. But if our housing agency, Rhode Island Housing, I think has done a remarkably good job. Statewide agency, very connected to all the localities, very good about that. And I think you can go around the country and see successes because you've got this close collaboration. Then you can go to other parts of the country and it's just, you know, they're just separated. We have to do better. There's no, I think, magic formula, and it's not going to, as I said before, we're not going to be able to have a legislative initiative that suddenly starts, you know, rationalizing, combining, et cetera. This is going to have to be a lot of it sort of talking, private communication, housing activists going in and trying to grease the skids so that these programs work. And to a degree in Rhode Island it does, and that's because it's a small state. We know people, and we can literally get everybody around the table. So we do a little better than some other parts of the country, and probably not as well in some other aspects too. I don't want to be too chauvinistic.
Can we take the time for one
take
more?
one more, yeah. In the back, I guess, but who wants to, is there?
Thank you, Senator Reid. Judy Kennedy, National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders. Thank you for all you do all the time for affordable housing. Apropos of that last gentleman's question, I just wanted to let you know that the education, I think, needs to start even within the administration. And let me use this one example. Thanks to you and Chairman Frank and Senators Merkley and Durbin, you explicitly included in the Small Business Jobs Act an opportunity for the Small Business Loan Fund to lend to community development financial institutions. On its own, the Treasury made the policy decision to disallow affordable rental housing, saying it wasn't small business, when we know that the ma and pa landlords are going to be the key to this recovery. So we hope to turn that around for the next year, but it really does have to start at home.
Well, one, thank you for what you do, Judy, but also, you know, part of our collective efforts has to be keeping us informed, because when we know that, we can actually pick up the phone and call, and sometimes they'll even listen to us, and, you know, try to get this dialogue going. But, you know, I think one of the strengths of the country is that if we can get the resources and the incentives right at the local level, we can do amazing things. And that's part of our challenge. And, you know, one of the reasons we wanted to get your organization and other organizations involved, these are typically locally based, locally connected folks who know the neighborhoods, know the people, and get things done pretty quickly, not, you know, a big agency here in Washington that's trying their best, but there's a disconnect. So, but I encourage everyone, and that's one of the reasons why CAP is such a hugely valuable resource to us, is to communicate with us your advice. If you think it's important, it's probably important. And I say this because it's so true. Don't assume we know what you know. Don't assume we know what's working. Don't assume we know that's what's not working. Let us know. We'll pretend we know, but we'll appreciate the information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator.